Welcome to the Thing About Salem. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
This is Sarah Jack. For International Women's Day, we're taking time to reflect on the experiences of women who have faced the devastating consequences of witchcraft accusations.
In years past, we've marked International Women's Day by exploring the deep connections between gender, misogyny, and witch hunts. We've spoken with Dr. Ann Little about how strict patriarchal hierarchies and fears concerning women's independence played out in the many trials in colonial America.
We've also spoken with Dr. Samantha Spence about the critical need for intersectional approaches to protect vulnerable women facing witchcraft accusations today, and how to champion the broader cause of gender equity.
And this year we are going even further. We invite you to join us this Sunday, March 8th at 6:30 p.m. GMT for a special live Zoom panel titled Justice for Women Accused of Witchcraft in Africa, featuring Dr. Leo Igwe, Chief Magistrate Sophia Musa Salihu, Dr. Barrister Dise Ogbise Gadiheri, broadcast journalist Hawa Mundi, and Maimunat Muhammad. The link to attend is in witchhunts.org/IWD.
For today's episode, we're diving into how one of Salem's most central figures, Tituba Indian, has been imagined, distorted, and reclaimed across 2 centuries of American literature and culture. Our guest is Samaine Lockwood, Associate Professor of English at George Mason University, and the 2026 Fenwick Fellow, whose forthcoming book traces Tituba's journey as an American culture figure from 1820 to the present.
We'll explore why works like a largely overlooked Anne Petrie novel marked a turning point in how Tituba is represented, and what it means that so many generations of writers have returned to Salem to ask who truly belongs in a just democracy.
Welcome to the podcast, Samaine Lockwood. Can you tell us a bit about your background and what brought you to American literature?
Sure. Well, I am an associate professor of English. Specifically, I'm a specialist in 19th century American literature and also gender and sexuality studies, and that's at George Mason University, which is in the DC kind of metro region. And what brought me to American literature? As a graduate student, I actually intended to specialize in Victorian literature. But my seminars in American literature were so interesting to me that I really could not resist. And so kind of switched over. So I had long been interested in the 19th century and then made this switch into American literature and American studies.
And congratulations on being named the 2026 Fenwick Fellow. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means and what project that fellowship is making possible?
Sure. So yes, I'm very excited. So I'm the 2026 Fenwick Fellow. So this is a fellowship program that's internal to George Mason. It's funded by our library, which is named the Fenwick Library, hence the name, the Fenwick Fellow. So basically, any faculty member can apply to be the fellow. And what it is, it's both providing research resources to the faculty member, as well as you have the opportunity to assist the library in its kind of acquisitions. So you end up having a much more robust kind of set of books and other materials that are housed at your home library for your own research. And for me, that will enhance my research. It will also enhance the work that my students do in the many courses that have grown out of my work with Tituba Indian and kind of thinking about the Salem witch trials as they are represented in American culture. Also, it will fund some research. So for the epilogue of the book that I'm writing right now, I'm going to do like a 7 to 10 day trip to Salem to do a kind of immersive analysis of how Tituba Indian is being represented across the various kind of touristic spaces and memorial spaces in Salem.
And the project has a title, Tituba Indian, The History of an American Cultural Figure. And so that is the lens you'll be looking through when you visit Salem and look for her there.
Exactly. Yes. So as a literature professor, I mean, we in the main, our research, of course, we write articles and we do other kinds of public facing things like podcasts and kind of general articles for more popular publications. But the book is kind of the main genre in which we share our research. And so I am writing a book that is provisionally titled, Tituba Indian, the History of American Cultural Figure. And so that is the project that I got the fellowship for. And so that project, basically, I am interested as a scholar of literature and American culture. I need to know about and am interested in kind of the historical truths of Tituba, but that is not the focus of my research. So my focus is specifically on how Tituba and the Salem story more generally, and I'm specifically interested in how kind of gender gets represented in that story and its representations, basically looking from about 1820 to the present day. And so I'm looking at how the Salem witch kind of episode, as well as Tituba Indian, have been imagined and reimagined and repurposed again and again across those centuries.
Are there any other representations of Tituba that we need to know about?
Oh, there are so many. One thing to know that I found really interesting, this research, I've ended up, most of my projects, other than my work with Ann Petrie, my projects have been primarily focused on the late 19th century into the early 20th century. Literary scholars kind of continue, not always, but continue to mostly hold to a kind of periodization where your area specialty is like 1865 to 1915 or 1920, like thereabouts, right? Like the post-Civil War period. But this project has been great because now that I'm focused on Tituba and how she's represented and how the Salem story is represented, I've really broken out of that and I'm looking across centuries of American literature and culture. So many different ideas for things to read. But I will say that for any of the listeners who love historical novels, there are many, many 19th century historical novels that are set in Salem and that depict the Salem witch trials. They do not focus on Tituba. You really have to go to the 20th century, and truly you have to go to the Black feminist intellectuals like Ann Petrie and Marise Konde's I, Tituba, Black Witch of Salem, to really have Tituba at the center of the narrative. Those 19th century novels tend to represent Tituba in very predetermined and racist ways. Even so, they are offering interesting kind of takes on the Salem witchcraft trials, and they're integrating Tituba in a kind of variety of different ways. Some of the most interesting ones from a cultural perspective are, to some degree, some of the most disturbing ones. There are just so many. But one that I think is very interesting is there's this author named Henry William Herbert, and he wrote this book called The Fair Puritan. It was a novel. He wrote it in the 1850s. It wasn't published until the 1870s. And in it, he has a Tituba character who actually isn't the Tituba of Salem, but is the kind of fascinating indentured / enslaved, we're not really sure, young Indian woman in the house of a fanatical Puritan, who is also the son of a regicide. I mean, it's like crazy. But there are these Gothic novels with these crazy plots. So there's just lots of, so The Fair Puritan is one. Lots of people, even though he doesn't have Tituba, lots of people talk about Lois the Witch, which is actually by British author Elizabeth Gaskell, which is one of the first to depict a kind of female villain, to depict like a jealous woman as the one who's using witchcraft kind of accusations in order to forward her own personal agenda, which is a major plot. But yeah, Ann Petrie's Tituba of Salem Village is a great novel, and it is not just for young people. It is definitely of interest. I have graduate students read it. They love it. It's a really great novel and one that is much less known than Marise Konde's and came before it by a couple of decades.
I really appreciate you sharing these authors and these titles and how they intersect with this topic. So I'm really hearing that we can really see the depiction of women struggling with our culture's acceptance of women's identity and freedom.
Yes, absolutely. And what ends up really being the focus or one of the main foci of the book that I'm writing now about Tituba is that when I've looked at all these narratives, these imaginative works about Salem, and I'm looking at novels, novellas, I'm looking at plays, I'm looking less often at poetry. I have to draw the line somewhere. There's so much stuff, there's like tons and tons of material. But yeah, so one thing that I'm realizing is that like these stories of Salem, witchcraft generally, but also just to narrow down specifically on these like fictional recreations of Salem, it's so fascinating to me how the Salem story really ends up being a story that is supposed to teach contemporary Americans something about rightful citizen, like correct moral citizenship, and is supposed to, by like negative example, demonstrate what should not be happening in society, in a democracy, in a post-Enlightenment like world. And so in those stories, very often, even in the ones written by men, the white women, the young white women who are accused end up emerging as having many of the qualities that we consider to be like characteristic of ideal citizens. So in other words, like in that 19th century literature that I was referencing, almost all those novels, almost all of them have the same plot, where a power-mongering colonial dude, usually someone associated with the church, sometimes with the law, sets his sights on a beautiful, young, motherless woman who doesn't want to accept his romantic advances. She says, no, thank you. And he is full of rage and he wants to get her at any cost. And he takes advantage of this more general kind of moment of power, hungry. This is the way they're depicting kind of Puritanism and Puritan ministers, and specifically, usually either the Reverend Samuel Parris or Cotton Mather. He decides that he's going to use witchcraft's accusation to either seek his revenge upon her or get her to consent to marry him. So the reason I bring this up is what ends up happening is like lovely, fabulous, smart, doesn't believe in witchcraft, young white woman, usually one who is already engaged to another more appropriate mate also. She ends up being accused. She ends up going to prison. And she has to do all these things that I think align her with ideal citizenship. She has to like not lie, not confess, not take the easy way out, so to speak. She has to deal with the imprisonment and the physical pain. She has to continue to hold by her values. She demonstrates like empathy. She demonstrates like Christian morality. She does all these things. Most of the time, she ends up rescued or ends up not being executed. Sometimes it doesn't go that well, but usually she's okay. And what happens, one thing I'm really interested in, is that basically white women emerge from this literature, these wrongfully accused white women, wrongfully accused of witchcraft, end up emerging from this literature as looking like some of the very best citizens that a community can have. And certainly citizens you want in democracy, right? I mean, they anticipate someone like John Proctor, who is totally idealized in Arthur Miller's The Crucible. But these are in the 19th century novels. But what's crucial and why Tituba is important is that often in the reimaginings of the Salem story, there are very few, often no people of color who are remembered or imagined. And if someone is remembered, it is Tituba. But Tituba, as an enslaved woman, and as someone who is often assumed to have diabolical influence over the young children of the Parris household, she ends up being the exact opposite, a kind of foil to the ideal white woman citizen. She doesn't have independence of thought. No, I'm not saying that this was true, but like this is how she's represented in these novels. She's represented as having a kind of inferior sort of slavish character. When I say that, I don't mean like she refers to white men, usually her enslaver, but also others, because there are all these racist stereotypes that are playing out in these novels. So she's not independent of thought. She confesses immediately. So she like doesn't hold the line when it comes to like truth telling. So she ends up also, even though I think we know more or less that the historical Tituba was probably in her 30s and likely had a young daughter, she's often old. Right? In these novels, Tituba is depicted as old. She's post biological reproduction. She's represented as a creature in these like racist ways of thinking about people of color, but also thinking about older, misogynist ways of thinking about older women. And so she's like the exact opposite of the heroine. And she ends up serving a really important role in this like development, in this recognition, I'm arguing, of the way that like the white woman comes to show that she can be an ideal citizen. That's very much in contrast to the woman of color. We have to ask ourselves, what does that mean across like almost 30 different novels from the 19th century in the exact period where you have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the end of the Civil War, emancipation, questions of Black citizenship, questions of Black suffrage. Like these all kind of, I think, are ultimately related. So it's really interesting to me the kind of cultural work that Tituba is called on to do, at least in the 19th century materials.
As we close out today's episode, we have a very important invitation for you for International Women's Day.
Please join us this Sunday, March 8th at 6:30 p.m. GMT for a special live Zoom panel titled Justice for Women Accused of Witchcraft in Africa.
We'll be hearing from an incredible lineup of experts on the front lines of getting justice for women who have been accused of witchcraft. This panel features our good friend Dr. Leo Egwe, Director of the Advocacy for Alleged Witches, alongside Chief Magistrate Safia Musa Salihu, who engages in addressing witchcraft allegations through legal advocacy.
We will also be joined by Dr. Barrister Dise Obise Gaudy Harry from the Association of Women Against Gender-Based Violence, broadcast journalist Hawa Mundi, and Maimunat Mohammed, Information Officer for Advocacy for Alleged Witches.
You can find the link to attend this discussion at endwitchhunts.org/IWD. We hope to see you there as we continue to acknowledge experiences of women.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Thing About Salem. Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.